It's supposed to be like this tomorrow, isn't it? This weather?
I think so. Not a meeting tomorrow.
Oh, no. So it was the way to go.
Should we turn that AC on?
But yeah, if you
Does
want
it
to,
get rid of warm hands?
it can, yeah.
At least it can.
Well, hardworking people.
Hi, how are you?
Leslie, how are you?
Good.
I know that.
Hi, Steve.
You can't remember.
Yeah, how are you?
After
It's
years.
been a long time. You're Dusty? I'm Ann.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
I am. How are you?
I'm very well, how are you?
Glad you can make it.
Not speaking.
This guy's in this conservation. Plan.
Oh, well, let's see how.
Now, that was way back in 2016.
Let's see. That's amazing. Actually, the whole color things really work. That's the time I kind of lost
That's the
sense of all it's
No
together.
continuity degree.
What are you from?
Sure.
Or is she like-
No.
you're just so similar.
Oh.
Seriously.
I didn't know that. But, where will the training flags go? So, but I got this.
So, I remember how. It's first.
On the trail every day.
You are really?
Yeah.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, it's not barely anybody would be able to see that.
So does the next stuff on there? I haven't seen that.
I haven't seen, because he used to go in there with his big blower.
Yeah, I used to
I
hear.
haven't seen that in a couple of years. I was actually concerned, but I saw him there. So he's still alive.
He's still there. He's taking back the arm by
Yeah,
my
his kids are over.
Yeah, so they make it so.
But we went in there, my neighbor. David Paul.
Yeah.
Remember, we change the color and everything, so it's easier to find. I think people are getting that big ones.
Okay, there were a lot of trash in there.
Yeah, so we fly them. So we give them that.
Yeah, I do need to go there. Yeah.
Hi, how are you? Good. How are you?
Yeah, they had a meeting yesterday.
So
I missed that.
was gonna put in an estimate for that number, and then I was like, why don't I just pull the budgeted amount? And then I was looking at the rest of it, and I'm like, why don't I just put in all of the actual budgeted amounts?
Yeah.
So they'll fix it right now.
Okay, thank you.
The budget's been, it'll be more accurate.
I put it on the agenda for next week. I told them to hold sending.
Okay. Well, I'm listening.
I'm gonna give it another minute, just because there were 2 other folks who said they were coming. That's fine. Okay. Nice to see you.
How are you?
How's your work going?
Good. Yeah, it's really exciting.
It's amazing.
That's the positive spin. No, it's good. It's super busy.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and challenging and exciting.
yeah, all of those things.
Yeah.
But that's pretty cool when I saw. Yeah.
That's when you're still Wisconsin.
Yes. Yeah, not the best.
Carol W.
We just did this 2 days ago. Okay.
Yeah, that's what
She's so good.
she's already ready. She's got 3 weeks left.
You
She's
were here
tired of
last
running.
time we did this meeting.
It's
So I just will before for this.
A while, in 2021, and then I think last year we guys had a meeting.
Like, we still got 3
There
weeks.
was
I haven't
kind
got
of
3 weeks
like
left. Vacation
stuff.
break.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah.
She turned a year a week ago, so.
Yeah, it's a little belated,
I go back
but.
to August 24th.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get going, and the others can join us, great. If not, we are recording, so the microphone is in the owl there for anybody who's not used to that. And aren't aware, it basically turns to whoever's speaking, so you're also on video. So, just so you're aware.
The video's in the hour.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So thank you all for being here. We've got several more members who have some commitments but are generally good for Wednesdays. So thank you for everybody for getting back to me on that. So we'll stick with the Wednesdays unless that seems to be a problem. So I thought if we could just go around the table really quick just to introduce the names and I guess if you're on any other town committees or just what's your interest in the comp plan, just so everybody knows each other. So Steve, do you want to
Yep,
start?
I'm Steve Rathrum, 95 Trevor Street. I live there with my wife. We've been there for 10 years. Previously, I was on the Wiscasset Conservation Committee. We first moved into town. In that committee, learned a lot about the town itself and the history and met new people. So since then, I've been trying to get engaged back in the volunteer spirit.
I'm Ann Leslie and I live west of the village, out toward, I think, toward your direction, out on Dickinson Road. And I have not been involved in town affairs for a while. But I did serve on the 2 previous comp plan efforts. And so I remember that, and I've always been interested in urban planning and planning in general, and watching the growth here in Maine has convinced me that there's something to be gained by thinking about it.
Sarah Whitfield, I'm chair of the select board. I volunteered to be chair of this committee before I knew I was going to be chair of the select board, so that's part of the reason why we're a little delayed in addition to the pandemic and other things, but I'm excited to get going again with you all and get this finished, so.
Heather Jones, I'm on this committee and also the chair of the Climate Action Committee. and clerk of the budget committee. So I kind of positioned myself to be part of the long range planning and preparations against climate change, whatever that means.
I'm Kim Anderson, and I am formerly a selectman in town and chaired this committee. The last time we tried to get it going, I think in 2018-19. And then I handed the torch to Sarah, and now I currently serve as the superintendent of schools for Wisconsin.
My name is Emily Rabbit. I'm the county planner of Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission, and I also serve through a contract of services as Wiscasset's town planner. That includes because it's contracted. And so I'm here just to provide some overall guidance and kind of like that 30,000 foot view on the comp planning process, as well as answer any questions about these things, and then also happy to meet occasionally as you move through your work and then do a review before it's submitted to the state.
So just to give sort of a little bit of a background. So the last plan was ended in 2018. And so like Kim said, we originally started up, got some initial work done, got an initial survey out. Pandemic happened, schedules happened, chair happened, all of that. And so we picked up a bunch of work in 2021, and then have been sort of on a break since then. We did do a survey, as some of you might remember, ended up with about 215 responses roughly for that survey. And I was looking today, the last response to that survey was in 2022 and the beginning of 2022. So that's something I want to chat about tonight, whether we think it makes sense to do a new survey, maybe a little bit shorter, but something that would reflect how things have changed. Emily volunteered to give sort of an overview of comp plans and like why we do them and that sort of thing that I'll let her do. But we do have a lot of resources at our disposal, which is nice, including a lot of checklists from the state. And we do have some initial drafts that the committee that Kim and Ann were part of previously started off with. So we're not starting from scratch, which is great. And so in general, we've got 13 chapters to do that are on various topics. So, hi, come on in. And 9 at least have some initial updates or have been in process. So again, not starting from scratch, so that's great. And then we do have a whole bunch of data that Emily got from the state for us in just a few months ago. So we've got some initial data that's new that we can update the plan with as well. And so some of the big things with this are, we've got these 13 chapters to do. We also have a fair amount of outreach to do in terms of workshops or discussions or however we want to structure that as a committee in terms of getting feedback from the public. So that's something that I hope that we'll be able to schedule for sometime this fall, early winter, so we can get going with that while we're still working on the initial drafts of the chapters. So with that, I was wondering, Emily, if you could give sort of a brief overview of sort of the process.
Sure. So I brought handouts, so hand out now.
Sarah, while she's doing that, when was the last time a comprehensive plan was actually done?
So 2008, and it was for 2008 to 2018. So it's been a while. So, and like one thing that came out of that was the Historic Preservation Commission, which is now was put down.
Yeah, so Sarah just kind of gave a good summary that comp plans are generally valid for 10 years. That being said, the state, especially in COVID and post-COVID, hasn't held you to that exactly 10-year standard. They also recognize that it takes a while to prepare a comp plan. It's usually an 18 to 24 month process, especially if it's a group of all volunteers and they're not, haven't engaged a professional consultant, if you will, to work on that. Now, I suspect that, as Sarah said, you guys have some work already completed, so I think 24 months probably is more than enough time. I think you'll probably be in like the 12 to 18 month range, depending on how frequently you meet, how quickly you get through your chapter inventories and how you decide to move that through, and then the amount of community engagement you do, whether you're gonna redo a survey, how many design shreds or workshops you may have on your future land use planning chapter, because that's really where you're gonna be seeking a lot of public feedback is, you know, what are your goals and strategies for the next 10 to 20 years for Wiscasset? Come on up. Too far. So what I gave you is kind of like a cheat sheet, if you will, that the state puts out. They call it a optional self-assessment checklist, but really this is your guidebook, your Cliff Notes version to writing a comp plan. It divides it by, you know, required elements, and then each of the inventory chapters that Sarah was referring to. So whether it's, you know, historical and archaeological resources, natural resources, waterfront, transportation, your public facilities, so your schools, your police and fire departments, your parks department. And so there are required elements that are required under the State's Growth Management Act, which was established back in the late 80s or early 90s, that started this comp planning process. And then there's also, you know, kind of guidance on what to consider in terms of your policies and strategies, which are kind of your desired goals for the future. And so it's lengthy, it's 20 pages. So I just printed front and back, but it'll give you a really good idea of what is required for each of these chapters as you write them. As Sarah said, there is some work that's already been done on them. And that is informed, those chapters are informed by data that the state puts together. They do it every, I think they have to have like at least 2 years between it. So we did a fall 2020 round where we got data, which I know back in late 2020 and early 2021, when we picked this up, we used that data. And then because we met the threshold, we were able to get spring 2023 data. So we have really recent information. And that data ranges from anything about, you know, in terms of transportation, it's looking at, you know, number of crashes, high incident areas, trips per day in terms of traffic counts. There's information on natural resources, such as it comes from an organization called Beginning with Habitat. So it looks at, you know, where are your marshes, where are protected species, whether they're plant or animal. So there's a lot of information on there. I sent the link to Sarah because it's all available online, and so I'm sure she'll send that out to all of you to look at that data package, because that's going to be where you get a lot of the information to answer all of the questions that are in here. So we kind of talked about like what's the point of doing this, because it's a lot of work and it can feel a little overwhelming, especially at a kickoff meeting. But the nice way to look at it is that it's a huge opportunity for Wiscasset to consider what you want for the future, and on a broad range of topics. So, you know, I think Wiscasset is at a really exciting point. You have a climate committee that's talking about climate change and how you want to be resilient towards a changing climate. You have a waterfront committee that has a subcommittee looking at, you know, some waterfront planning for the future and what they envision the waterfront to look like. You have a robust broadband committee that's looking at, you know, trying to get internet access to everyone, quality internet access to everyone in town. So there's a lot happening in Wiscasset. And so, you know, inviting those groups that have been doing this work for a while to come and talk to the committee or be on this committee is going to help you inform your comprehensive plan in terms of where we stand today, but also where we envision the future to be. And so it's exciting that you guys are starting this up again. And I think that you're going to be, you know, very successful in doing that because you've already been really doing this work. It's just taking all of these subcommittees or working groups and then coming together to put together in one document your priorities for the next 10 years, where you want to see growth, where you want to keep more of a rural character, what you want for the waterfront, what you want, you know, for town services, your schools. I know the school's coming up with a report in terms of like the future of the schools, so that can inform this comprehensive plan as well. So there's a lot of information out there that I think will hopefully be pretty easy to update your chapters, because that baseline work is already being done. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and before I jump into like how you can kind of move through this process in a timeline, is there any questions about why we're doing a comp plan or what the benefits are?
I do have a question because I'm such an old fogey and my mind is really rooted in the Growth Management Act. And I'm just sort of wondering, for instance, I've been out of town affairs for a long time. Do you think the comp plan that was passed has actually influenced drafting ordinances or other activities, or is it more driven by a state mandate?
So there is a state mandate that, says you have to do this.
Yeah.
I also think that there was, now 2008 is a long time ago, so what's still relevant, is still to be determined. But I think there were things that came out of that, for example, I know Sarah referenced the Historic Preservation Commission. That was a recommendation. It was created. And then, I know it's now defunct, but it's in the Conservation Commission. But this is also an opportunity to reevaluate and say, like, what from the 2008 plan is still a valid goal, or, we did that, was it successful? Should we continue the work? Should we reprise the role of the Conservation Commission or bring back the Architectural Board? So there's questions that can be looked at through, that lens. And also, while you do have to answer these questions, so it kind of feels like you're doing homework. It is also an opportunity to say, okay, like what else makes sense? There was a heavy focus in 2008 about the closure of Maine Yankee, and what to do with that and with Mason Station. I know there's been, talks over the years about what redevelopment of Mason Station might look like, what the impact of the tax revenue is from, not having Maine Yankee operational. But you also now have, I know in the, at the last town meeting in your budget, you would put in funds for an economic development person to be staffed here. So that's also another opportunity to say, we talked about needing some type of, new outlook on economic development. We've now put money in the budget for that position. Hopefully there'll be a posting for that and hired soon so that they could inform the comp plan as well and give the vision for what economic development could be possible and beneficial to the town. So it's stuff like that where you do want to reflect back. You don't want to just throw that out the window. But you also want to be forward thinking. And then it depends on how you use it. I mean, I think there's towns that will do it because they're required to and then stick it on a shelf and never look at it again. There's other towns that say, okay, we have done the comp plan. Now we want to form an implementation committee. An example.
That's where I, wanting it to be useful. And I was wondering if the board of select people, are you all in favor of having this kind of updates?
Oh, well, I mean, we haven't asked that question specifically, but we kind of have to be in favor of it. But I would say personally, I have always been of the mind that I really want this actually to be more of an action plan than just something we throw on the shelf. And I would just add to what Emily said, I was looking at some of the goals from last time and cemeteries were in there as well. And so, I mean, we redone the fence and the cemetery committee was resurrected and all that. So we did actually act on a few of those things. It took a while, but
So it's useful to you. I mean, I hope it is. I just want to know if it is,
yeah, and I guess from a personal perspective, it just feels like a waste of time if we're not going to use it like that. And particularly in a phase where I feel like a lot of people are interested in planning for the future, this is the natural place to do that. And like Emily said, incorporate all the different committees.
Yeah, that's great.
And so one thing I would add too is that you'll see as we go through some of these categories, we definitely want to include any relevant committees or ad hoc committees or whatever who might already exist, as well as like, we're talking about schools, obviously Kim and the school board are gonna be very involved. We're talking about Parks and Rec, Wayne's gonna be very involved, like all of that. We don't wanna make things up when we already have experts in the area and we have people who are volunteering for things. So that's at least my vision, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's been the sentiment, at least from being kind of an objective party watching, how the town has grown and had conversations over the past few years. I think there have been projects that have come before the select board and the budget committee when we're talking budget season of like, you know, I'm gonna use White Island, pick on White Island for a minute, you know, there was a discussion, there were some people that wanted to have a bridge go to White Island, there were others that said, well, wait a minute, you know, we're in a possible recession, is this worth spending, is it something that's identified in the comp plan? And I think one person at the public engagement session that Dwayne held last summer said, you know, well, maybe we should update our comp plan to talk about like, what are the priorities and let the community inform what the priorities are for these various projects, whether it's, you know, waterfront development, White's Island, expansion of Parks and Rec, whatever the topic is. I think there's a lot of people in town who would like to provide input, and hopefully, I think that's why you got more people signed up this go around too, to participate on the committee.
And I would really like to involve a lot more people, whether it's through just filling out a survey or attending some sort of discussion session or whatever it is. So I think that's really important, particularly, you know, we don't always get a lot of participation at other committee or board meetings or whatever. So this I'm hoping will be the committee that really draws in a very large swath of different perspectives and where people live and whatever.
It needs to be. It needs to
Yeah. Because otherwise it doesn't reflect the whole community.
Right, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Bob.
One thing I struggled with when I saw the sign up from volunteers is what is a comprehensive plan? So I found something online, just a one-page flyer, I'll just pass it around. and give them. It's really good. It's Brunswick's plan, but it basically brings it all up, just as a reference. It very much covers what you're talking about in a one-page format. It's what Brunswick did, but it's basically a state plan. So the question I would have to you, Sarah, is has an inventory been done as far as what the resources, you mentioned White Island, that was there this past.
So
Was there an inventory?
I would say yes and no, depending on the category. So there's some work that's been done, like in terms of, you know, the waterfront's got both a waterfront committee and a subcommittee that's working on sort of vision and looking forward. So I would say that's one of the more advanced ones, and a lot with natural resources, that's one of the more advanced ones. Broadband is something we need to update, which we've made some progress on since the last survey. So yes and no, depending on the category.
Okay.
But that's part of the initial looking at the chapter first and seeing if we've done that or not. Yeah, thank you.
But it does say there in red, the middle is an update required by May 12 years.
Okay. So we're a little, with COVID in there, we're right on
Right on
track,
track.
right?
I have another quick question for you, Ally. In terms of, in the previous major efforts of the two plans that actually made it through and were voted in, we did have the help of a consultant, and it was really, really helpful. I feel like the whole process has changed and maybe got more streamlined with things like this that allow committees to self-rule a little bit more. But is your time, as I know your time for planning as council, just one little piece of your huge pie? And how is your time allotted, or is it just?
So that Sarah and I have to talk a little bit more about whether we would, you know, commit funds to something, like if this is going above and beyond where we're doing a lot of the writing and editing versus right now, how our contract is laid out is that, you know, we'll attend, you know, some meetings, provide guidance, help answer questions, you know, help pull things together a little bit, do a final read through and provide guidance, maybe to help with the community engagement session. But what I can tell you is that I think especially with COVID, a lot of towns have found that if there's a will by the townspeople to do it in-house, that they have been successful. So I can give you a few recent examples. One is Noblesboro, who started with 9 members, right in like February of 2020. And so they shifted to all virtual, and they kind of dropped numbers, and by the end it was 5 members, but they wrote all of the inventory. They did a community engagement session on Zoom. And what they found was helpful was a couple of things. One was they didn't have just one chair. They rotated who was chair every few months. So it wasn't one person always putting together the agendas, taking minutes, you know, coordinating the editing of the document, and then they would sit on Zoom and kind of do a chapter or 2 per meeting. So each committee member was assigned a couple of inventory chapters just because their group was so small. They would, do a draft, write a draft. They would invite what they called content experts to that meeting. So for example, when they talked about natural resources, they invited, and water resources, they invited coastal rivers to come speak to them about, okay, have you considered this? Or, here's a good point to add, here's some more information. And they would help provide some of the more technical information to inform that chapter. And so then they would, without having to hire someone to do this, they would utilize that person for the month's meeting, take it back and maybe ask a few follow-up questions. And then towards the end, once they had all the inventories drafted, they would edit in real time on Zoom, and say, oh, hey, let's change. I mean, it was a lot of work, so it's a lot of wordsmithing, but they were really successful and the state was pretty impressed with their plan, especially considering it was 5 of them.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Inspiring.
It is, and so they're very proud to have done it, on their own without a consultant. And they're actually the town that I was referring to earlier with the implementation committee is now that they're moving forward with the select board to create that implementation committee to actually do what they said they wanted to do in the comp plan. There are 2 other towns, Damascus and Bristol, who have gone the route of creating subcommittees. So they had a lot more people volunteer for the comp plan committee. I think Damascus was about 15 and Bristol was over 20, which was impressive. And so how they decided to divvy it up was you would sit on, whatever interests you, you would sit on a couple of different subcommittees. So each inventory chapter had them. So you could sit on, like recreation and transportation or natural resources and, public facilities. And you would, those subcommittees meet in between the full committee meetings. So they, usually by Zoom will meet and discuss and someone will handle the writing. There's a subcommittee chair for each subcommittee and then they help pull together the information and do their editing and drafting as a subcommittee and then take the draft when ready to the full committee for review. And they've been pretty successful moving forward. Even Damascus, they've had a couple of staffing changes. The planner that they started with, Bob Bonds, he had retired, so then they took a while to find a new planner to fill that position, and then she decided to move on, so now they have a new planner. So it's been a couple of staffing changes, but they have, because they are so invested in the process, they've continued to move forward even without waiting for town staffing to change hands.
That's great.
So, and then Bristol did the same thing. They decided to engage a consultant at the end to help with the future land use chapter and then the public engagement piece. So doing, kind of like a more charrette style public engagement sessions, but they did a lot of the inventory work on their own and then asked the consultant to just edit them and kind of make it sound like one voice reading through each of the chapters. So there's definitely ways to do it without having to, allocate a significant chunk of town funds to hiring someone. But it's really up to, the committee and how much time you have and your ability to dedicate to this, because it is a big, heavy lift to do these comp plans.
So we do have actually a fair amount of funds that we can use for a consultant. We have a little over 17,000 that we have not used, that was already put in the budget quite a few years ago now, that keeps rolling over, as well as we do have the part-time contract with Lincoln County. And actually, I think we're hoping next week the job posting will go up for the town planner, but we do have them at least right now in that capacity. So we've got to chat more to update an initial proposal that I was reading today, but I would imagine that we'll hire them for some capacity, at least for helping us with editing the chapters and the future land use. And they've already done the transportation chapter. So that's great to check off. Might need to update some, but
Yeah, I think we'll
We'll
update some of the data, right, we wrote it in March of 22, so we'll just use the new crash count data and whatnot from DOT, but it shouldn't take us long to update. And as we do for any town in Lincoln County through a contract with Maine Department of Transportation. So that's just something Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission offers, and so we're writing Bristol's and Damascus, and then we did Wiscasset's a while ago, we'll just update it.
so we definitely have some help.
That's a transportation plan?
That's the transportation chapter,
that-
yeah.
And pedestrians, is it all?
No, it includes, so it can, it depends on how you separate it. If you have a separate recreation chapter and you decide you wanna put pedestrian and cycling in that, or like what we did for Damascata was we took on the transportation in terms of vehicular rail, which is probably what we're gonna wanna update too, because we now have the excursion rail line. And then we also included cycling and pedestrian. So looking at, sidewalks, which we get the data from DOT in terms of, sidewalks, locations, and then any cycling plans that the state may have for the area.
We got the airport.
We have that in there too.
Sarah, I just jumped in and tried to do a quick search in my Google Drive and find the old stuff. Do you have all of the chapters that we had worked on and with the most recent revisions?
Yes.
It might be in my select down that I
Yeah.
have access to.
I don't know if you meant to, but I think you transferred ownership
I-
over to mine,
that was
because it
the
says
thing
I'm the owner now.
It would have been a smart thing to do. I just don't remember doing it.
So I guess sort of moving into the next agenda item, which is basically how we're moving forward and tasks to be completed. So, one of the things I'm gonna do is I'm going to, so thanks to Kim mostly, we have a fairly organized Google Drive with folders of previous chapters. We have, the 2008 comp plan, so if we want to go through that, we'll definitely be looking back at those to use as sort of a foundation. We have initial survey responses that are in there that are helpful if you want to look at that. And so I'll send that around, as well as, since we're missing a few folks, I think it might make sense for me to send out the link with the list of chapters. And if you want to let me know which ones you might be interested in terms of just your general interest area or things that you have expertise in. Or if you're just willing to do any of them, that's also helpful too. I expect everybody will help out with at least a couple of them. And so we can kind of share that work. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of them that have an initial foundation. So we'll be using this checklist for sure, to go through, and one of my goals is I'd like to at least get some initial edits done on most of the chapters by the September meeting. And so I thought we could, after I send out that, people can let me know what they're interested in, we'll make the assignments, and then I can check in with all the people who are interested in the various chapters, and then we can start to get going on that. And so that's kind of one next step. The other next step, is whether we think we should do another survey, keeping in mind that we will definitely do other workshops or discussion sessions or whatever you'd like to call it, whatever we decide to format them as in terms of getting input, but whether we think we need something updated, given that the last response was from early 2022. So looking for thoughts on that.
I would need to look at that again and think about, whether the questions are still relevant.
Absolutely, and I can send around the link too, so you can see if you
This
didn't.
is a survey for 22.
Yeah, so it started in 21
Right, okay.
and about,
That survey that you can go online and fill it out.
yeah, and then a few people did it,
Excellent, yeah.
in person.
Good, good to see you.
So I'll send that around too, and a while ago, I had put together some of the kind of top level overview things that people put in there. For important amenities, the top 5 things were availability of broadband internet service, that was the highest. So I'm happy to report we're making progress on that in terms of our broadband committee, so that's good. Small town atmosphere / quality of life, the tax rate, quality of town services, and the rural scenic setting in terms of the top 5 things people were, felt were the most important amenities. And I would guess a lot of those are still true. The question, I think that was the last one, where would you like to see the town of Wiscasset in 10 years? 179 people responded to that, and just doing a general look through and tallying of common themes that came up. I had attracting more families / remote workers / younger demographics, a town planner, thriving downtown, lower taxes, improved educational outcomes, and pharmacy. And now we're getting pharmacy, so check on that one too. So we have made some progress on some of these, which is the good news. But I think, so I'll send around the results and you can just scroll through what the questions were. It probably makes sense to do another round, particularly since we're reinvigorating the committee and getting more people involved. I think more information is good. So you can take a look at that and let me know your thoughts. If there are any reasons that you think it's really a bad idea, we can chat about that too, so.
We have new people in town too,
We do have new people in town, yes,
survey respondents.
absolutely, absolutely. You know, and I think we can take advantage of, various avenues in terms of we'll have it online and we can also have it at town office, but I think, you know, we can, whether it's concerts on the common or that kind of thing, where we can have it available, or the November election or whatever. I think we can be creative with, where we gather that information and make sure as many people as possible can fill the ballots. All right, is there anything I'm missing? Do you feel like really in general overview?
So the only other thing I would add is, I don't remember, because it's been a while, but, part of the comp plan is also, you can kind of see is this vision statement. And then what I will say is, there's been a few towns, I think especially post-COVID, that have started to think of that vision statement of also considering like kind of some overarching themes to their comp plan. So what both Damascata and Bristol looked at was also kind of having this viewing each chapter through the lens of a changing climate. And so how can we be more resilient? So when we're looking at, you know, I'll use transportation, for example. When they're looking at the transportation chapter and vehicle miles traveled and traffic counts and, you know, is there a way to then also shift the focus, especially when we're talking goals and strategies of, you know, how can we adjust and maybe reduce our emissions? Or they're also looking at, you know, obviously their waterfront as what do we need to do with sea level rise? And so I know, you know, Heather's committee with the climate committee is doing a lot of that work, kind of an overall priority setting exercise. But it might be a nice opportunity to use that data to inform, and those priorities to inform your overall comp plan as you do each chapter inventory and then start looking at your goals and strategies. So it's those type of themes. Another one was Noblesboro looked at their plan and actually added an inventory chapter, which they didn't have to do, on lifelong community building. So looking at, you know, as you have a population that is getting older, what services might be beneficial, but also whatever services you provide to those that are aging in place are also going to be beneficial to young families. So for example, if you have more walkable sidewalks, it's not just great for someone that might have mobility issues, it's also great for a family who's trying to get a stroller down to downtown. So they wrote a specific chapter on what they call, you know, intergenerational community building, but then also kind of had that thought in the back of their head as they prepared their goals and strategies for other chapters as well. So one thing to consider as you do this work is, are there any type of goals like that you might want to, you know, view each inventory chapter through those lenses?
That's some good work.
But
Sounds like towns.
they are, I think a lot of people are kind of really re-engaged with the idea of, you know, doing comp plans, and it feels less like a state mandated chore and more of a way to really, you know, do some priority setting for a community.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping that we'll find this work both interesting, but also really helpful for the town and stimulating for all of us in terms of thinking forward, rather than just a chore. Terry, did you have a question?
I was just interested in the possibilities for the waterfront working group to be able to include some of the things that they have looked at specifically in the area of waterfront, climate change, and some, you know, economic development for, and what this capital could look like 10 years from now. There's a little piece of that addressed in what they're doing right now. I just wondered if y'all were aware.
Definitely, well, and it was my understanding too that working group was supposed to be complementary to the comp plan in
That's
terms of
exactly
once
right.
we-
That's why I bring it up.
Yeah, so,
They're working to be complimentary with you, so we're hoping that,
yeah, so that's,
getting everybody together.
that's one of the ones that I would wanna bring in when we get to the appropriate chapter, which, and that one probably crosses over on a couple different chapters, but, and there'll be some others like that. But, that would be my hope, is that as we go through these, we will make sure that we'll include any relevant committees or ad hoc committees, or even just other citizen groups that are working on various things, in these discussions, because there, like I said, there's no point in reinventing the wheel when we've already got people thinking about ideas, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking forward, it looks like Wednesdays are gonna work. I think we have at least 3 other folks who have committed to the committee, which is great. I think that makes us a good number to get a lot of this done. And so I've got September 13th, which is a Wednesday in the town office, is our next meeting. So like I said, I'll be sending out a whole bunch of information to you. Please do take a look in terms of the different categories that you'd be interested in, so we can get those assigned and get the work started, the ball rolling on that. And take a look at the survey in particular and see what your thoughts are on whether we should do another one, if it should be different, that kind of thing. We'll definitely address that first thing on the agenda in September. I just lost the next thought. Oh, I know what it was. I've been taking notes and I will put together notes for tonight, but I'm hoping that someone might volunteer, or we can even do a rotating thing where someone would be willing to take notes in the future. So we can have some updated minutes, but I'll do that for this time, and then, if anybody's interested in helping out with that next time, that'll be greatly appreciated. Any rotate? That's a good. Yeah, I kind of love the chair rotating thing.
I second that one. Everybody vote.
That's a great idea.
So we'll put that on the agenda as well, and we'll chat about that and see.
And I
who's-
can get you details on how Nobleboro, like, was it every month? I think it was like every 2 or 3 months, so it wasn't.
Yeah, seems like a lot to do it every month.
Right, but I can get those details for you and how successfully they rotated it.
Okay, perfect. And as I said at the beginning, we'll do these meetings as much as we can in person, but we'll also have the Zoom option, and we'll be recording, so if you ever have to miss, we'll have it on there, and I'm happy to check in with anybody, and I'll check in with all those who could be here tonight to make sure they get up to date.
Is there anyone on Zoom?
Richard Forrest was for a second, and then Susan Johnson's on, but that's it for now. Although I don't know who's on YouTube, because you can't see who is watching, so you never know.
Is it live streaming through YouTube?
Yes.
That's really cool. It's like fancier than school board.
I'm sure we
We're
can
gonna have
have you
to
up with
find
that.
the.
All right, any other questions at this point? Okay, well, thank you all for being here. I'll give you all your info over email. Let me know if you have any concerns, ideas, and we'll get moving and get this done.
Thank you.
Alright, sounds great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for what y'all do is important.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.